The scorching summer sun beat down on the bustling grocery store parking lot as Michael Jennings eased his reliable sedan into a coveted spot near the entrance. The asphalt radiated heat, creating a shimmering mirage above the pavement. Michael, a 34-year-old black software engineer, let out a satisfied sigh as he switched off the engine, grateful for the prime parking location on this busy Saturday afternoon. As he reached for the door handle, a loud screech of tires caught his attention. An older model white minivan, its paint chipped and bumper held together with duct tape, came to an abrupt halt in the adjacent spot. The vehicle was a chaotic mess of clutter, plastic bags strewn about, a worn-out child's car seat barely visible among the debris, and a rosary dangling from the rearview mirror. The driver's door flew open, and out stepped Marta Gonzalez, a 41-year-old woman whose weathered appearance spoke volumes about her hard life. Her clothes were mismatched and faded, her hands calloused from years of manual labor. The lines etched on her face told a story of struggle and hardship, a testament to her life as an illegal immigrant working under the table cleaning jobs. Marta's eyes narrowed as they locked onto Michael, her expression contorting into one of barely concealed frustration. Without hesitation, she stormed towards him, her voice rising with each step. Hey you, she shouted, her accent thick and her tone accusatory. That was my spot. I've been waiting for it. Michael, caught off guard by the sudden confrontation, held up his hands in a placating gesture. I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't see anyone waiting. If you'd like, I can... But Marta cut him off, her voice growing louder and more aggressive. You didn't see? Of course you didn't see. People like you never see us, do you? The simple parking dispute quickly spiraled into something uglier as Marta's frustration transformed into outright hostility. Her words became sharper, more pointed, revealing deep-seated prejudices and insecurities. You think you can just take whatever you want, huh? She spat, her face contorting with anger. You entitled, lazy people, always taking what you don't deserve. Michael's brow furrowed, shock and confusion evident on his face. He tried to maintain his composure, his voice level as he responded, Ma'am, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm happy to move my car if... But Marta was beyond reason. She stepped closer, invading Michael's personal space, her finger wagging dangerously close to his face. Misunderstanding? The only misunderstanding is that you think you're better than me. Michael took a step back, his hands still raised. I don't think that at all. Please, let's just calm down and... Calm down? Marta's voice rose to a shriek. Don't you dare tell me to calm down. You have no idea what I've been through, what I deal with every day. The confrontation was reaching a boiling point. Marta's body language became increasingly aggressive, her eyes wild with unchecked anger. Without warning, she shoved Michael hard, catching him off balance. Hey, Michael exclaimed, stumbling back. There's no need for... But before he could finish his sentence, Marta's hand flew through the air, connecting with Michael's cheek in a resounding slap. The sound echoed through the parking lot, drawing gasps from nearby onlookers. For a moment, Michael stood frozen, his cheek stinging from the impact. In a reflexive action, born more from shock than anger, he slapped back. The blow wasn't harsh, but it was enough to make Marta stumble backwards, her eyes wide with surprise. A hush fell over the parking lot, the air thick with tension. Marta's expression shifted from smug to stunned, her hand touching her cheek where Michael's palm had connected. You hit me, she said, her voice a mix of disbelief and growing rage. Michael, realizing what he'd done, immediately tried to de-escalate. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to... But Marta had already turned on her heel, retreating to her minivan. For a brief moment, Michael thought the confrontation was over. He was wrong. Marta yanked open her van door, rummaging through the cluttered dashboard. When she emerged, she was clutching a key, her face a mask of fury. She stormed back towards Michael's car, her intentions clear. Hey, stop, Michael called out, but Marta paid him no heed. With quick, deliberate movements, she began carving jagged lines into the paint of Michael's sedan. The sound of metal scraping against metal filled the air as she etched deep scratches across the hood and side panels. Esta es lo que merecen los hombres como tú, she muttered under her breath, her words dripping with venom. This is what men like you deserve. A few bystanders, shocked by the escalating situation, pulled out their phones and began recording. Marta noticed but seemed unbothered, her sense of entitlement on full display. She truly believed no one would stop her. As she finished her act of vandalism, she turned to Michael, a smirk playing on her lips. But she wasn't done yet. Michael approached his car, his face a mix of disbelief and mounting anger as he surveyed the damage. "What the hell? You can't just—" The roar of an engine cut him off. Marta had returned to her minivan and started it up. Before Michael could react, she abruptly threw the vehicle into reverse. The sickening crunch of metal against metal echoed across the parking lot as Marta's minivan collided with Michael's front bumper. Without missing a beat, she shifted gears and sped off, her tailpipe coughing black smoke as she fled the scene. Michael stood there, stunned, as he watched the minivan disappear around the corner. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone, quickly snapping a photo of Marta's license plate before it vanished from view. With shaking fingers, he dialed 911, adrenaline surging through his body. As the phone rang, he looked around at the shocked faces of the onlookers, some still recording, others whispering among themselves. 911, what's your emergency? Came the calm voice on the other end of the line. Michael took a deep breath, trying to steady his voice. I need to report an assault and hit and run. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the bustling gas station as Marta Gonzalez pulled her battered minivan into a parking spot. The vehicle's mismatched tires screeched in protest, and the expired plates rattled against the rusty frame. Marta yanked the keys from the ignition, her hands trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. She'd just fled the scene of an altercation, but in her mind, she was the wrong party. Storming into the gas station, Marta made a beeline for the counter, her eyes blazing with indignation. The young clerk behind the register looked up, startled by her sudden entrance. $15 on pump 3, Marta barked, slapping a crumpled bill onto the counter. The clerk cleared his throat nervously. I'm sorry, ma'am, but gas prices went up this morning. $15 won't— What? Marta interrupted, her voice rising. You're trying to rip me off now, too? First that pendejo in the parking lot and now you? Ma'am, I don't set the prices. I just— Marta's tirade was cut short by the sound of police sirens approaching. Her head snapped towards the windows, eyes widening as she saw 2 patrol cars pulling into the gas station lot. For a moment, panic flashed across her face, but it quickly morphed into defiance. As the officers approached the store, Marta's posture stiffened. She crossed her arms, chin jutting out defiantly. The bell above the door chimed as 2 officers entered, their eyes immediately locking onto Marta. Ma'am, are you Marta Gonzalez? One of the officers asked, his tone professional but firm. Marta's eyes narrowed. Who wants to know? The second officer stepped forward. We need to ask you a few questions about an incident that occurred at the grocery store parking lot earlier today. Marta's demeanor shifted instantly. Her arms uncrossed, and she began gesticulating wildly. Oh, see, that man, he attacked me. He tried to steal my parking spot, and then he hit me. Can you believe it? In broad daylight. The officers exchanged glances. Ma'am, that's not the story we heard. We have a report of you assaulting a man named Michael Jennings and damaging his vehicle. Marta's face contorted with indignation. What? No. That's not what happened at all. He's lying to you. Por favor, you have to believe me. I'm the victim here. Her voice rose, a mixture of broken English and rapid-fire Spanish. He pushed me first. He called me names. Racista. That's what he is. The first officer held up a hand. Ma'am, please calm down. We need to check your vehicle. My vehicle? Why? This is harassment, Marta protested, following the officers as they headed back outside. As they approached her minivan, one of the officers crouched down to examine the front bumper. Ma'am, can you explain these fresh paint marks? Marta's eyes widened for a split second before she regained her composure. What marks? I don't see anything. You're making things up now, just like that man. The second officer sighed. Ms. Gonzalez, we have evidence that you vandalized Mr. Jennings's car and then deliberately crashed into it before fleeing the scene. We're placing you under arrest for vandalism and assault. Marta's face paled, but her voice only grew louder. This is outrageous. You can't do this to me. I have rights. As one of the officers began to read her rights, Marta's protests escalated. You're only doing this because I'm Latina. This is discrimination. I demand to speak to your supervisor." Despite her vocal resistance, the officers managed to handcuff Marta and guide her towards the squad car. Her shouts echoed across the gas station lot, drawing curious stares from other customers. "You're making a big mistake. I know important people. They'll hear about this," Marta yelled as she was placed in the back of the patrol car. The drive to the police station was filled with Marta's continuous protests and accusations. She alternated between playing the victim and making vague threats, her voice growing hoarse from the constant shouting. At the station, Marta was led to processing, still muttering under her breath about injustice and racism. The booking officer asked for her identification, which Marta reluctantly provided, her hands shaking slightly. As her fingerprints were taken and run through the system, Marta's bravado began to falter. She watched nervously as the officer's expression changed, his eyebrows rising as he looked at the computer screen. "Ms. Gonzalez," he said slowly, "it appears you've been living in the country illegally for over 15 years. You have a history of arrests under various aliases." Marta's face drained of color. For the first time since her arrest, she fell silent, her mouth opening and closing without producing any sound. The officer continued, "This significantly complicates your situation. In addition to the charges of vandalism and assault, you're now facing potential deportation." Reality crashed down on Marta like a tidal wave. Her carefully constructed world of lies and evasion was crumbling around her. The mask of arrogance she'd worn for so long slipped away, revealing the frightened woman beneath. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No, you can't. I have a family here. I have a life." But even as the words left her mouth, Marta knew they were hollow. She had no family here, no real connections. She'd pushed away anyone who got too close, fearing they might discover her secret. As the full weight of her situation settled on her shoulders, Marta slumped in her chair. The fight had gone out of her, replaced by a crushing sense of defeat. Years of living on the edge, of justifying her actions with a misplaced sense of entitlement, had finally caught up with her. The officer began explaining the process that would follow, but Marta barely heard him. Her mind was reeling, trying to grasp the sudden, drastic turn her life had taken. In the span of a few hours, she'd gone from feeling invincible to facing the very real possibility of losing everything she'd built over the past 15 years. As she was led to a holding cell, Marta's thoughts turned to El Salvador, the home she'd left behind so long ago. She'd convinced herself that she deserved better, that she was entitled to the American dream, regardless of how she achieved it. Now, faced with the prospect of returning, she realized how little she had to show for her time in the U.S. Sitting on the cold bench in the holding cell, Marta buried her face in her hands. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry, her sobs echoing off the bare walls. The facade she'd maintained for so long had finally shattered, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions and the uncertain future that lay ahead. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Marta Gonzalez's trial began. The air was thick with anticipation, and the gallery was packed with curious onlookers, eager to witness the proceedings. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floors. Marta sat at the defense table, her posture rigid and defiant. She wore a ill-fitting blazer and skirt combo, clearly borrowed or second-hand, in an attempt to appear respectable. Her dark hair was pulled back into a tight bun, revealing the deep lines of worry etched across her forehead. As the bailiff called the court to order, Marta's lawyer, a young public defender named Sarah Rodriguez, stood up. She smoothed down her suit jacket and approached the jury box with measured steps. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Sarah began, her voice steady and earnest, "the woman before you today is not a hardened criminal. She is a survivor, a woman who has spent the last 15 years working tirelessly to build a life in this country." Sarah gestured towards Marta, who tried to affect a look of humble gratitude. "My client, Marta Gonzalez, came to this country seeking a better life. She has worked jobs that many would consider beneath them, cleaning houses, washing dishes, caring for other people's children, all to survive in a country that offers little support to those in her position." The prosecutor, a stern-faced man named David Chen, listened impassively, his pen tapping quietly against his legal pad, Sarah continued, her voice rising with passion. On the day in question, Ms. Gonzalez was under immense stress. The constant fear of discovery, the struggle to make ends meet, it all came to a head in that parking lot. Her actions, while regrettable, were born out of desperation and fear. As Sarah returned to her seat, David Chen stood up, buttoning his suit jacket as he approached the jury. The defense would have you believe that Ms. Gonzalez is a victim of circumstance, he began, his voice clear and decisive. But the evidence tells a very different story. Chen clicked a remote, and a large screen lit up, showing security camera footage from the parking lot. This video clearly shows Ms. Gonzalez initiating the confrontation, physically assaulting Mr. Jennings, and then deliberately ramming her vehicle into his. The jury watched in stunned silence as the events unfolded on screen. Marta's face remained impassive, but her hands, clasped tightly in her lap, began to tremble. Furthermore, Chen continued, we have multiple witness statements corroborating Mr. Jennings' account of the events. And let's not forget the most damning piece of evidence, Ms. Gonzalez's own actions after the incident. She fled the scene, demonstrating a clear consciousness of guilt. Chen paused, letting his words sink in. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not the action of a stressed, hard-working immigrant. This is the behavior of someone who believes they are above the law. As the trial progressed, witness after witness took the stand, each account further dismantling Marta's defense. Michael Jennings testified, his voice steady as he recounted the events of that day. I was just trying to park my car, Michael said, his eyes briefly meeting Marta's across the courtroom. She came out of nowhere, screaming that I had stolen her spot. Before I knew it, she was hitting me. Sarah attempted to paint Michael as the aggressor during cross-examination, but his calm demeanor and consistent story held up under scrutiny. Mr. Jennings, Sarah asked, her tone probing, isn't it true that you retaliated by slapping Ms. Gonzalez? Michael nodded, his expression somber. Yes, I did. After she had repeatedly hit me, I slapped her once in self-defense. It's not something I'm proud of, but I felt threatened and reacted instinctively. As the prosecution's case built, Marta's demeanor in court became increasingly agitated. She whispered furiously to her lawyer, her gestures becoming more animated with each damning piece of evidence. When it was Marta's turn to take the stand, she strode to the witness box with an air of indignation. She took the oath with a hint of disdain in her voice, as if the very act of swearing to tell the truth was beneath her. Ms. Gonzalez, Sarah began, can you tell us about the events leading up to the incident in the parking lot? Marta leaned forward, her voice sharp and accusatory. That man, she pointed at Michael, he think he can just take whatever he want. I was waiting for that spot, and he just drive in like he owned the place. And how did that make you feel? Sarah prompted. Angry, Marta exclaimed. Always these people, they think they better than me. I work hard, I deserve respect. During cross-examination, David Chen's questions were pointed and relentless. Ms. Gonzalez, why did you flee the scene after ramming Mr. Jennings' car? Marta's eyes darted around the courtroom. I was scared. He hit me first. But the video clearly shows you initiating physical contact, Ms. Gonzalez, Chen pressed. That video is lie, Marta shouted, her composure cracking. Everything is against me. As Marta's testimony continued, her responses became increasingly erratic and defensive. She contradicted herself several times, and her insistence that she was the true victim rang hollow in the face of the overwhelming evidence. In his closing argument, David Chen addressed the jury with quiet intensity. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence before you is clear. Ms. Gonzalez not only initiated a violent confrontation, but also deliberately damaged Mr. Jennings' property. Her actions show a blatant disregard for the law and for the safety of others. This is not about immigration status or cultural misunderstandings. This is about holding individuals accountable for their choices, regardless of their background. Sarah's closing argument was impassioned, but struggled against the weight of evidence. We ask you to consider the larger context of Ms. Gonzalez's life, the stresses she faced, the constant fear of discovery. While her actions were misguided, they were born out of a lifetime of struggle. As the jury filed out to deliberate, a heavy silence fell over the courtroom. Marta sat rigid in her chair, her eyes fixed on the door through which the jury had disappeared. The deliberation was surprisingly short. Within 2 hours, the jury returned, their faces solemn as they took their seats. The foreman stood, her voice clear in the hushed courtroom. On the charge of assault, we find the defendant, Marta Gonzalez, guilty. On the charge of vandalism, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of reckless endangerment, we find the defendant guilty. As the verdict was read, Marta's facade of defiance crumbled. Her eyes widened in disbelief, and she began to shake her head violently. "No, no, no!" she screamed, rising from her seat. "This is not fair. The system is rigged." The judge banged his gavel, calling for order. "Ms. Gonzalez, control yourself, or you will be held in contempt." Marta collapsed back into her chair, her body racked with sobs. "I was just defending myself," she wailed. "You don't understand what it's like." The judge's voice cut through Marta's cries. "Ms. Gonzalez, you have been found guilty of serious crimes. Your actions showed a blatant disregard for the law and for the safety of others. I hereby sentence you to pay full restitution to Mr. Jennings for the damage to his vehicle and to serve 3 years in state prison." The judge paused, his expression grave. "Furthermore, given your illegal status in this country, I am recommending that your case be referred to immigration authorities for deportation proceedings upon completion of your sentence." As Marta was led away by court officers, her screams echoed through the courthouse. "This is not justice. You're punishing me for surviving." Michael Jennings watched the scene unfold with a mix of emotions. Relief washed over him as the verdict was read, but it was tinged with a deep sense of exhaustion. As he gathered his belongings and prepared to leave the courthouse, he couldn't help but reflect on the events that had led to this moment. Hey everyone, if you found this story gripping and want more jaw-dropping tales, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you're always in the loop. You're always in the loop. You're always in the loop.